Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Dorothy here from the CCMA, and apologies, I know you can't see my screen. I'm having technical issues for once, which to be fair, we haven't had up to this, so apologies for that. But on screen, you will see Niamh, as always, from WSI. So once again, I'm on board, and obviously Kim Robertson, our guest speaker this morning. So huge interest in this webinar this morning, because I think workforce scheduling, workforce management, workforce planning is one of those key specialist areas for contact center operations. And I know myself, the most emails and calls I get in relation to any particular role in a contact center is, do you know a good workforce planner? Are they interested in moving? So that's certainly one of the key roles. And I know we've some of the gurus with us this morning. So I know Neil, Seamus, a couple of members of a working group we previously had on workforce planning have joined us this morning. So we're delighted to see that. So we're just going to give a couple of minutes for everybody to join in. I can see you all joining there. Hi Neil, hi Susan, hi Paul. Great to see so many of you this morning. And as always, I think this will be a very interactive session, so please send questions through as you have them, because as you all know, the half an hour flies. So please do send through any questions, and either myself or Niamh will put them to Kim as they come in. So Kim is the Director of Customer Experience with 11. Huge expertise in this area, and I know, Kim, you might give a brief overview of your own credentials, if that's okay, when I hand over. And I know what we're going to talk about is the challenges around workforce planning in this new way of working and the new environment. And Kim is going to speak to that for a couple of about 10-15 minutes, and then take any questions that you have either during it or at the end. So Kim, if it's okay with you, I'll hand over.
That's great. No, morning everybody, and thank you very much, Dorothy, for that intro. I think for some people like myself that find days are merging into each other, today is Friday, thankfully. I was a bit worried when the title was kind of like Ask the Expert, and I certainly listened to one that Annette Hickey said as well, that I think kind of in times like this, we certainly don't seem to be kind of, or appear to be experts. I think everybody is trying to find their way. So what I'm hoping to do, as Dorothy said, in the next kind of like 10-15 minutes, is just really share experiences, share issues of what we're hearing, what our customers are talking about, what we're hearing from kind of basically what's happening within the industry. And certainly with people like Neil on the call, who actually I might even say is equally, if not more of an expert than myself. I think kind of some of the questions, Neil, I might even kind of direct to you. So it's great to have you on board. Just quickly, being within the contact center industry for around about kind of 30 odd years. Contact center manager myself, also been involved in setting up, transforming contact centers, very much within the finance center, and also kind of on a global basis. Last 4 years, in fact, I've been kind of across with a big investment bank across in the States. So hopefully can bring some of that global experience to this session as well. So what I'm hoping to kind of, as I said, cover within the next 10 to 15 minutes is just an overview of the challenges that people are kind of like talking about, certainly around workforce and planning and forecasting, as they're having to try to kind of recalibrate, re-optimize with everything that's kind of going on, and trying to understand how to kind of manage all of that data that's kind of coming through and the challenges that they're facing. If there is a silver lining to all of this, is there an opportunity really for us to try and do things differently? Even some things that possibly in the past, you know, as kind of planning reporting teams, we thought we wouldn't even try. I think with now, you know, by far the majority of people are starting to work from home. Can we actually use this as an attempt to kind of like try, be more flexible, bring in new things? So I'm just going to go over kind of like some of the things that people are actually trying, some successful, some not, but just again to share those ideas with you. And as we go into that great phrase that everybody's kind of using, which is the new norm, what are the things that we should kind of, certainly from a planning and a forecasting perspective, be aware of as we're kind of like going into that phase? And then any kind of questions and answers, very much kind of use this as a kind of open forum to really kind of like share share ideas, which would be good. So challenges that certainly that we're finding, and I think from as I said, the planning and the reporting perspective, it's a great time for teams, in a sense, planning teams to really shine, because you've always been kind of like the center of what's been happening in the contact center. And I think so kind of even more so, although we often feel as though we're probably now with a bit of a kind of a crystal ball trying to work out what's happening. It is kind of where the main information is kind of like being held. And a lot of people, certainly from planning perspective, are kind of talking about kind of 3 phases as we move through this. Pre-COVID, if you can ever remember that, during, and then actually as we start to merge out of this kind of like post, all of which are needing very distinct kind of plans, very distinct kind of like schedules. And actually, as we look at the inputs are actually starting to be varied and different as well. And certainly one thing that seems to have kind of like changed, and the majority, certainly I saw that kind of the report was saying over 50% of contact centers are actually starting to see productivity actually increase. One side that's kind of like good, but there's also a downside that we need to kind of certainly be aware of, that often feedback from agents are that now that they're working from home, they're finding it exceptionally intense, and that you know, that they're finding it kind of like very difficult. They often get kind of like lost in what's kind of like happening, that they're not getting that distraction that they normally kind of get within the contact center, and they can often kind of see it as kind of quite stressful. So that's certainly some of the issues, the downside to that kind of productivity. I was on a webinar actually yesterday, of which there was 193 contact centers involved from a global basis. And what was interesting, that they did a poll there actually, and 42% of those kind of attending saw an increase in productivity, and we're kind of taking that into kind of like perspective. But actually only 44% saw a decrease in productivity, which is kind of like interesting. I think kind of one of the key things is that we're probably now into a new shrinkage, which again seems to be another phrase that is coming out of this, that shrinkage actually in the inputs that we would normally put into shrinkage are kind of like changing kind of like focus. OPA, or phone time, very much is kind of like decreasing. With people working from home, there's no longer those kind of like corridor conversations that people are having. So you're now having to actually timetable those one-to-ones a lot more. So there's a lot more time around huddles in the morning, daily stand-ups, sessions with team leaders, and even just those kind of communication are becoming more essential. So we're starting to see that kind of increase within shrinkage. Also kind of people are saying that wrap time is also kind of increasing as well, that whether that's, again, going back to that conversation around agents are finding it more intense, that they're kind of starting to take that breather. I think we saw that anyway within contact centers, that often when call volumes started to increase, sometimes that after call work would also start to increase as agents took that time to just kind of take additional breathers. So certainly wrap seems to be something that kind of we're getting feedback that seems to be getting kind of like longer. Also as well within shrinkage, which is interesting, we're starting to get kind of like new things being included, which is very much kind of like tech related. So, you know, broadband's gone down, broadband's slow, computer just doesn't seem to work. Even a case of I've had to share my laptop with my children who are working from home, so I can't actually start to kind of take calls. So suddenly like kind of new things are beginning to kind of appear in shrinkage, which we've never had, and that's kind of certainly started to kind of change that shrinkage. Another thing as well is not only ourselves and kind of our agents are also kind of working from home. What's also happening is that our customers are as well. So what we normally would have expected is that kind of like two-humped camel with the peaks and troughs kind of like during the day, is that certainly one of our customers has actually had literally those kind of the peaks squashed into the middle of the day. So you're actually seeing kind of like the pattern and the profile of the calls completely kind of change. Others have actually seen kind of like a widen out. So the two humps have actually gone into one peak, but actually calls are starting earlier and actually kind of going later in the day. So again, that starts to look at kind of questions around shifts. Do we need different variety in shifts? That we're now getting call profiles for times that we never really recruited our agents for. So that kind of typical two-humped camel call profile we're finding, and the question is that really dead? And I suppose that kind of leads on to a whole question, I think kind of like Neve that we were kind of talking about.
Yeah. I'll put that up now.
So just with this one, sorry, it's kind of a question of, have you found that your normal kind of like call arrival pattern has changed? Are you getting those kind of two-humped camels, disappearing, or is it surprisingly actually kind of remaining as normal? So a yes or a no would be great.
Yeah, we've got the answers coming in there, so I might just give it 10 more seconds and then we'll get through with some of the results. So you should be able to see the answers coming in now.
Yeah, 80%. That's good. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, so I think kind of everybody's beginning to find the same, that certainly there's that kind of complete change. Okay, that is interesting. Thank you. I think, yeah, so that actually kind of leads on to this kind of next slide, which is, can we take an opportunity, certainly as those that are involved in kind of like forecasting, certainly scheduling and planning, to actually start to do things differently and try those things that possibly we kind of stayed away from because it kind of looked as though it was kind of like a bit too difficult. Now, the reason why I've actually put this picture up is it's a contact centre in Liverpool, actually from 1910, and you can actually see the planner on the right hand side. That's the woman kind of sitting at the desk. And this kind of the way that actually they did their scheduling led to kind of the formation of trade unions, and they actually went on strike in 1912 because of something that actually now seems to be kind of now, like over 100 years later, is coming back in favour, which is split shifts. So going back to that kind of question, the comment that I made about agents finding working from home and working kind of like their normal shift pattern as more stressful and more intense. Some people are now beginning to actually start to look at split shifts. So can you split it into blocks in the morning, then kind of giving a long break even during lunch, or fitting around kind of like the lifestyle adjustments that we're now all having to face as like kind of work and private starts to kind of merge kind of more into one. So if you've got school, home, schooling, or even now in a sense, certainly kind of in the UK, as some of the schools are beginning to kind of go back and, taking kids and picking them up. And as people are starting to gradually go back to work. So in a sense, again, home care, at home, is there an opportunity to start to kind of bring in those kind of like split shifts and start to break the day up into 2 or kind of like 3 blocks? And that kind of also leads into preferences, which I know kind of like some of the workforce management tools actually allow you to do. And I know certainly, and I know Neil's on the call, that we've kind of like had conversations around kind of like the use of preferences, and sometimes people have kind of like moved away from this, which is where, and again, people are kind of using preferences a different way, and it's an opportunity as like those call patterns are changing to actually offer blocks of time where you're seeing you're actually needing kind of like more agents or kind of calls are spreading that you didn't have before, that actually kind of the agents can say it's their preference that they'll actually now start to move and work those times. So again, you get agents to actually feel as though they're being empowered to kind of start to create their own shifts, which can actually be varied, you know, working less days or working kind of more blocks during kind of like different days. So you can actually start to bring in those preferences. And what some have done is just kind of like released blocks of time and how many agents they actually need to work during those blocks of time, and get agents to kind of like vote as to when they want to do it. Again, also can link into areas like kind of overtime as well. So that's something to look at, even more bouts of kind of like part-time. And as we're all kind of, you know, seeing those kind of call patterns and volumes change, is it an opportunity to actually kind of even review opening times? And whether they should be extended or kind of like decreased. And also as well, whether there's like kind of a bit more of a diversity of day, going back to giving that variety and kind of decreasing the stress at home, or if there's admin email that can actually be done at kind of various different times to actually when the guys are actually taking the call. I suppose the caveat to all of this is it, and we're talking about kind of bringing in more flexibility here, it's obviously going to have to link back to the contracts. And how flexible people's actual contracts are within the contact centres. It might not be possible to do a lot of this. And again, it's probably linking in with HR as to kind of what options there are about kind of being able to change people's contracts. Okay, next slide. The next one really is, as we start to kind of like move into the new norm, as people are talking about it, what kind of other things that we should really start to kind of think about, and are probably kind of like really important to look at. And I think we're all used to either using the last 12 weeks data as a kind of like a profile of what those call profiles should be, and using that obviously to kind of plan and forecast going forward. And we don't have that luxury anymore. And really there's like no valid data at all possible, going back to those kind of like phases that we're talking about, pre, during, and kind of like post-COVID. A lot of people are actually just using the last week and seeing if that's actually, you know, the last week might just be the best indicator that we've got. Also, a lot of people are just like constantly modeling as much as they can. And I've got kind of like the question of doing 3 forecasts, but that's kind of like the good, the bad, and the ugly, basically. It's kind of, we're now going to have to lesson learned is like predict for the unpredictable. And it's often worth kind of like doing, okay, what could be the extreme? And it kind of links into, and we hate to think that the possibility could happen, but if we start to get second waves, if we start to get kind of what people are talking about now, like localized flare-ups, that might actually impact, again, depending upon how far kind of your agents are kind of like working from home, as to, again, how many people can actually get on the phones and kind of like support it. With that, I think becomes the very much kind of more the macroeconomic side of it, which is literally watch the news constantly. And again, if you know you've got kind of agents that sitting in the UK, we've obviously got like 4 devolved countries, all of which are doing things differently at different times, and even from a customer perspective as well. So if you've just got kind of Irish as well as English or Scottish kind of like customers, their behavior is going to change, which is kind of like a major kind of thing in all of these kind of like call patterns. So it's being very, very much aware of what's happening around you. Obviously kind of listening and talking to management, because that's obviously going to impact kind of like schedules, forecasts as to, you know, what's happening. I think with the forecasts as well, keep them, and if you're doing a lot of what if scenarios, keep those templates. I mentioned I was working out in the States the last 4 years. We actually saw when we had that horrendous vote in the UK around Brexit, calls actually increased by 30% of the impact that it was literally having on the American market. those what if scenarios we actually kept, because then they actually were very good to when we had the presidential election and kind of certain major things started to happen after that, because it gave you some literally guidance of what was needed and how to kind of like react. So again, just kind of keep those modeling and track and trace, in a sense, and no pun intended, what's happening about kind of inputs into shrinkage. And also with shrinkage as well, people are talking about a hidden shrinkage, and it links back into comments I was saying about stress, and sometimes some agents find it intense, and not all agents kind of like working from home. There will be some that are kind of desperate to get back to kind of working in the office. Is that kind of when we come out to this and there's talk about mental health, etc., it's something that we probably need to be aware of, that sickness might actually start to increase. People are still going to need to self-isolate. It's obviously not gone. I hate to say, as I mentioned before, second wave, holidays is going to be really kind of like key. And whether you've got people that are furloughed or not, or certainly people will have had kind of like holidays cancelled, stopped holidays. The whole management of holidays as we go into kind of like the end of year is going to be kind of like very interesting. And that's probably where you can link it back to those split shifts, and even having, you know, days off within a week as opposed to having a whole week or whole fortnight off. Also, you know, as well, kind of look at, as we've talked about, the kind of the things that were the trends that we're seeing happening around possible decrease in lunches and breaks as people are at home, but that extra time that's needed for those kind of like one-to-ones, and whether we still see that continuation of wrap time. But I think a key thing to remember is watch the maximum occupancy. Even in those pre-days when we saw occupancy go above 85%, we started to have that kind of correlation with sickness. So above 85%, you would start to get kind of an increase in sickness. And that again is still something to kind of like watch, even kind of more so I'd say in these times. Diversified day, again, kind of like bringing in variety, if you can, into the agent's day. Again, similar with the split shifts, or even if they're not doing that, kind of email, admin tasks, you know, online training, and so they're not kind of as intense on the phone all the time. And I think kind of like a key thing as well in all of this is that obviously as we're finding life changing and, you know, people working from home, also our kind of our customers' lives are changing as well. And, you know, again, kind of linking back with what's happening kind of with the news and with announcements, that's also going to kind of change customers' behavior. So it's trying to see and get some of that kind of crystal ball and that some of prediction on what are the impacts of that kind of what we're seeing with our customers going to have on our call volumes. I think if anything, it's probably that we're going to have to, flexibility is key as we move forward, and it's being able to kind of make those very, very kind of like short notice changes and kind of like quick adjustments. But that certainly is kind of like it from me. So hopefully there's been some nuggets in there that have helped or you're doing, and I think even that would be kind of like quite interesting to see if anybody has done anything with preferences or split shifts and actually started to make it work. But that's it from me, Dorothy. So if anybody's got any kind of questions or answers or shared experiences, much appreciated.
So Kim, there's a comment and then there's a few questions. So I'll kick off with the comment first, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So Eamon has said, today working from home is not a true working from home, as many have kids at home, etc. The situation will change when schools are open. Also, many contact centres may decide to bring a percentage of their teams back on site and offer more flexi work, etc. This will all balance out as things evolve with COVID-19. For productivity, I feel this is also up in many cases as employees feel they need to prove that working from home works and that they do not want this to see this forced pilot fail. I feel this will also plateau out with time. And actually, I think that working from home and people really wanting to prove it works is a very valid point.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I totally agree. And I must admit, I think kind of Annette Hickey said that kind of, you know, from a PayPal perspective, I think everybody's just kind of desperate to, I think, kind of just move as in a sense as a community, kind of like prove that we can do it. And I think that's going to be, when I was talking about the phases as well and kind of like post, I think that's going to be interesting as we start to settle down and we're into kind of like month 3. How are things going to kind of like vary and change? But yeah, no, couldn't agree more, because I think we've kind of been forced into, in a sense, kind of like homework, and we never recruited people to actually work from home, and we've never done that kind of total assessments of, you know, making sure they're not using their kind of like living room table, or you've got kind of like dogs and cats kind of appearing as part of videos and stuff like that. And I would totally agree on that comment. Totally agree. Yeah, definitely.
A question from Paul then. What do you feel the new norm will be in terms of talent development? For example, how do we prepare potential new managers for stepping into roles that will require new skills, i.e. leading teams remotely?
Yeah, actually, that's interesting. That really is interesting. And I think actually it's a similar comment to if I think kind of like pre-COVID, when suddenly we used to have kind of like team leaders having to not only manage their teams where they're physically, you can physically see them, but often some team leaders actually were managing teams across multi-sites. And, you know, as kind of contact centers became actually more virtual, you had that kind of situation that you had to, in a sense, communicate more and put more emphasis on kind of like communication going forward. So I think it was kind of one of the comments I said about you can't have that water cooler kind of conversation anymore. And with duty of care, certainly as kind of like team leaders and team managers, there's more effort now needs to go into having those daily conversations with agents just to make sure that everything is okay. But you have to timetable it all. You can't just, you know, as you're going for a break, just say, you know, hi, how things are going. And again, this is where kind of as a kind of planning and a scheduling perspective, that becomes even more important, because you've got to make sure that additional time is actually given for those kind of conversations.
And Kim, a question on consumer behavior, because obviously I think when the COVID hit first, people were very patient and they understood that contact centers were reorganizing. But as we come out of it, I know myself, when I've been calling a couple of different companies, you know, you get the message, people are, you know, we're restructuring, there's going to be a delay. But I presume consumer patience will wear once things start opening up, and they won't necessarily be willing to sit in a queue for 15 or 20 minutes because, you know, they think it should be back to normal in some respects.
Yeah, I think kind of we're starting to see that now, even so much around kind of, I don't know, there's certainly kind of within the UK, there's been kind of quite a lot around kind of travel and getting refund from holidays. I think, again, more from a government perspective. And, you know, as we're, you know, sadly starting to see us kind of going into recession, when people are kind of like getting desperate, banks, finance, as the certainly, I was speaking to a bank the other week that as the mortgage market is now beginning to open up, and they were actually stopped taking new mortgage applications, whereas they are now. They saw kind of literally over 200% increase kind of like in call volume, but they also started to see a massive increase in complaints, because I think people now feel as though they've had enough time. It's like kind of week 10, week 11, you should have kind of like settled down. You should actually now be in a position. And I think this is where probably use of kind of like technology comes into it as well, and as to whether there are areas around self-service, AI, other options of technology that we can actually use to kind of start to remove some of that kind of like volume. Again, kind of like PayPal was talking about increases in kind of like messaging and SMS, that can be kind of other options. So I think we kind of now need to start to look back and see if there is stuff that we can actually use from a technology perspective to ease that pressure away from kind of, you know, the agents and the pressure. But I totally agree, Dorothy. I think we're starting to begin to see that in certain kind of like sectors of the economy at the moment. Agree.
And last question, Kim, I know you touched on this earlier, this whole idea of new ways of working, new ways of workforce planning and sort of the gig economy, and that people will potentially be able to pick their spots and that will work better in a working from home environment. Does that completely turn workforce planning on its head then, in terms of what become split shifts, that type of thing?
Yeah, it kind of does. And I know you kind of mentioned, Neil, from like the Bank of Ireland. I must admit, it was a conversation that I had with kind of those guys even like a few years back, that, you know, there are kind of workforce management tools that allow you to kind of do, you know, the bidding and the preferences. But as soon as you open that floodgate, it's literally kind of open. But we have certainly seen kind of like in the States that some companies have literally kind of like published blocks of kind of like 2-3 hours during the week of just the number of kind of like agents that they want on the calls at those particular times. And instead of doing those normal like 8 till 4, 9 till 5, 10 till 6 shifts, actually people are either doing kind of, you know, 12 days, 12 hours, you know, 2 hours. They're having like kind of variety between kind of like the weeks. So as you said, it's very much like kind of bringing in that kind of that more flexibility and kind of, as they said, that gig economy, that people are actually working their own shifts. But again, it's a kind of a bit of a, hopefully a win-win, that you're actually getting kind of the right number of people within agents within kind of like the right slots. There obviously becomes the issue, and this is the whole kind of like, you know, the downside to that is you're not going to get 100% accurate of everybody's preferences at the same time. So you then start to get into, you know, okay, so you weren't able to do it, get what you want this time, but next time we publish it, we'll make sure that you're kind of like top of the list. So it's how you start to kind of deal with the people who don't get what they want, and also in a sense those kind of even 10 o'clock at night or 6 o'clock in the morning, those slots that aren't always filled. How can you actually kind of encourage that they are filled? And that's when you start to bring kind of like team leaders in and starting to do kind of priority lists and stuff like that, and sharing. But it's certainly a movement that seems to be kind of getting a bit of a groundswell. It started really with the whole debate of how do you manage with millennials who want to have that flexibility. But I think now with the situation that we're in, it's becoming like more and more obvious.
Yeah, and I suppose the challenge is it's a much more complex job than trying to
totally. I mean, yeah, from a planning perspective, it is a nightmare. It can be. And I think the downside is that suddenly like you're having to get a bigger team trying to work out kind of like people's preferences. Yeah, I mean, there are tools in the workforce management tools that can actually do it. But again, huge debate as to how accurate that can be and how you can make it happen. But it's certainly a movement.
And as you say, once you offer it, it's very hard to take it back.
That's the whole thing about bidding, shift swaps, everything. Once you've got those floodgates open, the expectation is there that you're not going to bring it back. So actually some have done, when we're talking about kind of the changes in the call patterns, some have kind of brought in like a bit of preference, that where you've got those changes, that's where you offer the preferences. So, you know, as you used to kind of offer overtime on certain days, on certain events, you've actually done that for preferences as well, and kind of slightly brought it in just around the edges just to see how it works. Because I think to go for like full, it's yeah, a lot of work.
Great. I'm conscious of time, Kim. We've gone a little bit over, but I think really fantastic talk. Thank you so much. I know we spoke beforehand that we had this working group of workforce planners, and I know this, as I said, there's more than a couple on this webinar today. So if we were thinking we might look to reconstruct that group, albeit remotely through Zoom. So if anybody on the call today that's a workforce planner is interested in taking part in that group that Kim will facilitate, and how it worked before is we had a series of meetings just to discuss challenges, you know, very specialist group, because obviously it's people doing this job, just drop me an email. And if you're interested in taking part in the group, our plan would be to try and have the first sort of meeting remotely before the end of the month. So please drop me an email if you're interested in taking part in that. And the second thing I really want to push with everybody is our survey. So we're undertaking a survey which we think will really offer very valuable data for everybody on working from home policies, people's plans, companies' plans for reopening their contact centres, and also the normal sort of valuable benchmarking data on attrition, absenteeism. So can I just ask that anybody who hasn't been in touch with me already from your particular organisation, if you are interested in completing the survey, will you drop me an email and just let me know who the contact point will be, and then Coin Research, who are the company undertaking the research on our behalf, will be in touch with you directly. And also just want to say thanks to Niall. Niall Hughes is on the call, and he was the winner of our competition for the remote working photograph. So I don't know if you'll have seen that through our social channels. So well done, Niall. Congratulations to him, and also to the team from Merlin who were won the team prize. So thanks a lot. Thank you very much, Kim. I know if anybody wants to get in touch with you, your contact details there, and a recording of the webinar will be made available for people to download afterwards. Thanks as always, Niamh, and we'll talk to you all soon. Take care. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Bye.